It was a quiet evening in the neighborhood, the kind where the sun painted the sky in warm shades of orange and pink, and a soft breeze rustled through the trees. Jordan had just wrapped up a long day at work. All he wanted was to get home, kick off his shoes and finally relax. His apartment building was just a few blocks away, a place he had lived in for over 3 years. It wasn't the fanciest building in town, but it was home. And tonight, home was exactly where he needed to be. As he walked up to the entrance, fishing his keys out of his pocket, a voice stopped him in his tracks. "Excuse me," the woman said, standing firmly in front of the door. Jordan looked up, surprised. She was in her mid-40s, well-dressed, and had a stiff posture like she was guarding something important. He had seen her before, maybe in passing, maybe at the grocery store nearby, but they had never spoken. "Can I help you?" Jordan asked, confused. She crossed her arms. "I was about to ask you the same thing." A small chuckle escaped Jordan before he realized she wasn't joking. She was staring at him, her eyes sharp, her stance unmoving. "I live here," Jordan said simply, gesturing toward the door. He held up his keys as proof. The woman's eyes narrowed. "I've never seen you before." Jordan sighed, already sensing where this was going. He had been through moments like this before. Moments where his presence was questioned, where he had to explain himself in places he had every right to be. He had hoped this time would be different. "I don't see how that's relevant," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I live in apartment 4B. I just got home from work, and I'd like to go inside." She didn't move. Instead, she took a step closer, blocking his way entirely. "I don't think so," she said, shaking her head. "I know everyone in this building, and I've never seen you. You need to tell me who you're visiting." Jordan felt his patience slipping. He could already picture the headlines. Another case of someone being questioned in their own neighborhood. Another moment where suspicion replaced simple human decency. He wasn't looking for trouble. He just wanted to go home. He held up his key again. "Look, I don't need to explain myself to you. Live here. Now please move." But she didn't. Instead, she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police," she said, her voice firm. "If you really live here, they'll clear things up." Jordan took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He could already imagine how this might unfold. The questions, the assumptions, the potential misunderstandings. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was, being treated like an intruder at his own doorstep. A few other residents walked by, glancing curiously at the scene but not stopping. Jordan felt trapped, frustration building inside him. And then, just as the woman raised her phone to her ear, the door suddenly swung open from the inside. Jordan turned, relief washing over him when he saw who it was. But before he could say anything, the woman spoke first. "I need you to confirm something," she said, her voice still sharp. "Does this man live here?" Jordan held his breath, waiting for what would come next. The door had barely finished swinging open when a familiar face stepped out. It was Mr. Lee, the elderly man from the 3rd floor. He was small in frame but always carried himself with quiet confidence. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he held a newspaper tucked under his arm, probably heading out for his usual evening walk. Mr. Lee paused, looking between Jordan and the woman with a puzzled expression. "What's going on here?" Jordan exhaled slightly, relieved to see someone he actually knew. "Mr. Lee, could you tell this woman that I live here?" The woman quickly cut in before Mr. Lee could respond. "I don't mean to cause trouble," she said, her voice holding an edge that suggested otherwise. "I just don't recognize him, and I don't think it's unreasonable to make sure he's supposed to be here." Mr. Lee frowned slightly. He had known Jordan since he moved in. They weren't close, but they always exchanged polite greetings in the hallways or near the mailboxes. "He does live here," Mr. Lee said simply. 4th floor. Jordan expected that to be the end of it. A reasonable person would have apologized, maybe looked embarrassed, and moved out of the way. But the woman didn't budge. Instead, she narrowed her eyes, as if Mr. Lee's confirmation wasn't enough. "How do you know?" she pressed. Just because you've seen him around doesn't mean he lives here. Maybe he's someone's guest. Maybe he's lying. Jordan clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. Lady, I literally have my key in my hand. What more do you need? She folded her arms again. If you really live here, then you shouldn't mind waiting for the police to clear it up. Mr. Lee sighed, shaking his head. This is ridiculous, he muttered under his breath. Then, turning to Jordan, he said, You don't have to put up with this. Just go inside. Jordan hesitated. Technically, yes, he could push past her and walk in, but something told him that would only make things worse. She seemed like the kind of person who would twist the story, make it seem like he forced his way in. And the moment the police arrived, who would they believe? So he stayed where he was, gripping his keys tightly. Why are you doing this? He asked, looking her in the eye. What exactly do you think I'm going to do? The woman didn't answer right away. For the first time, she looked slightly uncertain, like she hadn't fully thought through her own actions. But she recovered quickly. I just want to make sure everything is safe here, she said. I don't know you. And if you really live here, you shouldn't be getting so defensive. Jordan let out a dry laugh. You're stopping me from entering my own home, and I'm the one who shouldn't be defensive. Before she could respond, the door behind them opened again. This time it was a younger woman, Maya, who lived down the hall from Jordan. She had her headphones around her neck and was holding a grocery bag in one hand. She took one look at the scene and immediately frowned. What's going on? She asked. Jordan was about to answer when the woman turned to Maya, her tone suddenly shifting to something almost friendly. Do you know this man? Maya blinked. Yeah. He lives here. What are you even talking about? Jordan could almost see the gears turning in the woman's head, trying to come up with another excuse, another reason to hold her ground. But now, with two different residents confirming Jordan's presence, her confidence wavered. Still she didn't move. Maya's expression darkened. Lady, you need to step aside. This is insane. The woman pursed her lips, looking between them, clearly still unwilling to admit she was wrong. I just wanted to make sure, she muttered, her voice quieter now. Jordan shook his head, exhausted. You mean you just wanted to make sure I belonged here? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned away and walked off toward the street, her shoulders stiff, her phone still in her hand as if she had been seconds away from dialing. Jordan exhaled slowly, watching her go. A part of him wanted to call her back, make her explain herself, force her to admit what this was really about. But he knew it wouldn't change anything. People like her never thought they were wrong. Maya sighed beside him. You okay? Jordan nodded, though he wasn't sure if it was true. He finally turned back to the door, slipping his key into the lock and pushing it open. But as he stepped inside, something about the encounter still lingered. Why had she been so insistent? Who even was she? And more importantly, was this really over? Jordan shut the door behind him, but the weight of what had just happened didn't leave him. His hands were still tense, his heart still beating faster than it should. He knew encounters like this happened all the time. He had read about them, seen videos go viral, but experiencing it firsthand was different. It wasn't just frustrating, it was exhausting. It made him feel like no matter what he did, no matter how normal his life was, there would always be someone ready to question his right to exist in his own space. He took a deep breath and walked toward the elevator. As he pressed the button for the 4th floor, he could hear Maya behind him, still shaking her head. I swear, this neighborhood is getting worse, she muttered. Not because of crime, because of people like her. Jordan gave her a tired smile. Thanks for stepping in. Of course, she said. You shouldn't have had to deal with that alone. The elevator doors slid open and they both stepped inside. The ride up was quiet, but Jordan could tell Maya was still thinking about it, just like he was. Do you know her? He finally asked. Maya frowned. I think I've seen her around a few times. She moved in recently, maybe a couple months ago. I don't know her name though. Jordan nodded slowly. So she wasn't just some random passerby. She lived here. That meant there was a chance he'd run into her again. The thought made his stomach turn. When they reached their floor, they stepped out together, and Maya sighed. "Try not to let it get to you too much," she said. "Some people just look for reasons to feel in control." Jordan wanted to believe that, but it didn't make the situation any easier. "Yeah," he said. "I'll try." They parted ways, and Jordan let himself into his apartment. The familiar space should have felt comforting. His couch, his bookshelves, the soft hum of his fridge in the kitchen, but instead everything felt slightly off. He tossed his keys onto the table and sank onto the couch, rubbing his hands over his face. He replayed the conversation in his head. Every word, every glance. He could still feel the weight of her stare, the way she had looked at him like he was some kind of threat. What would have happened if Mr. Lee and Maya hadn't come outside? Would she have actually called the police? And if they had shown up, how would that have gone? He grabbed his phone and opened his messages. His best friend, Chris, had sent him a meme a few hours ago, something stupid about work life, but Jordan wasn't in the mood to joke around. Instead he typed, "You ever had someone try to stop you from going into your own building?" Chris replied almost immediately. "What? What happened?" Jordan hesitated, then started typing out a short version of the encounter. He wasn't sure why he felt the need to tell someone. Maybe just to hear that he wasn't crazy for feeling the way he did. After a moment, Chris responded, "Bro, that's messed up. You okay?" Jordan stared at the words for a second before typing back, "Guess, just mad. And tired." Chris sent back a string of angry messages about how ridiculous the whole thing was, but none of them really made Jordan feel better. He appreciated the support, but it didn't change what had happened. It didn't change the fact that he'd have to walk past that woman again one day, that this wasn't some random stranger on the street. It was someone who lived here. And the worst part, he still didn't know why she had done it. Was it just paranoia? Did she really think he didn't belong? Or was it something deeper, something uglier? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. For a second, his stomach tightened. He wasn't expecting anyone. Was it her? Slowly he got up and walked over. He peeked through the peephole and exhaled when he saw Mr. Lee standing outside. Jordan opened the door. "Hey." Mr. Lee gave him a small nod. "I just wanted to check in," he said. "Make sure you were okay after all that." Jordan was surprised but grateful. "Yeah. I mean, it sucked, but I'll be fine." Mr. Lee sighed. "People like her. They think they're doing something right, but all they're doing is making life harder for good people." Jordan leaned against the doorframe. "You ever deal with anything like this?" Mr. Lee chuckled, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Son, I've been dealing with things like this my whole life. Just in different ways." Jordan didn't know what to say to that. He could only nod. After a moment, Mr. Lee patted his shoulder. "If you ever need anything, you know where to find me." Jordan gave him a small smile. "Thanks, Mr. Lee." As the older man walked back toward the elevator, Jordan felt a little lighter. Not much, but enough. But the feeling didn't last long. Because later that night, as he was getting ready for bed, he heard something outside his apartment door. A rustling sound. Faint, quick movement. He froze, listening carefully. His heart picked up speed. Slowly, he walked toward the door and looked through the peephole. At first, he didn't see anything. The hallway was quiet, empty. But just as he was about to turn away, something caught his eye. Piece of paper. Slipped under his door. He bent down, picking it up with careful fingers. When he turned it over and read the words written in thick, uneven letters, his stomach dropped. "I'm watching you." Jordan's fingers tightened around the note as his eyes scanned the words again. "I'm watching you." The letters were uneven, rushed, almost like they had been scratched onto the paper in a hurry. His pulse quickened. His first instinct was to throw the note away, pretend it was nothing, but the unease creeping up his spine told him otherwise. This wasn't random. It wasn't some joke. It was a message. He stood still for a moment, listening carefully. The hallway outside his door was silent. Whoever had slipped the note under must have already walked away. He glanced through the peephole, but like before, the hallway was empty. Deep breath. Then another. His thoughts raced. Who would do this? Was it the woman from earlier? Had she decided that stopping him from entering his own home wasn't enough? Or was it someone else entirely? Someone who had been watching him longer than he realized. The idea made his stomach turn. He walked back to his kitchen and tossed the note onto the counter, staring at it as if the words might change if he looked long enough. Maybe this was just someone trying to scare him. Maybe it didn't mean anything. But something told him it did. His phone buzzed on the table, making him jump. He reached for it quickly and saw Chris's name on the screen. "You good?" Chris asked the moment Jordan answered. Jordan exhaled. "Not really." Chris must have picked up on the tension in his voice because he immediately asked, "What happened?" Jordan hesitated. Saying it out loud somehow made it feel even more real. "Someone left a note under my door," he said finally. "It said, 'I'm watching you.'" A beat of silence on the other end. Then Chris's voice, lower this time. "Man, that's not random." "I know," Jordan muttered. "You think it's that woman?" Jordan rubbed his forehead. "I don't know. But she's the only one who's had a problem with me." Chris let out a sharp breath. "All right, listen. This isn't something you ignore. You need to be careful, all right? Lock your doors. If you see anything weird, call somebody." Jordan nodded, even though Chris couldn't see him. "Yeah. You want me to come over?" Jordan appreciated the offer, but what was Chris going to do? Sit outside his door all night? Still, the thought of being alone in his apartment after everything didn't sit right. "Yeah," Jordan said. "If you don't mind." "Be there in 15, Chris said. Jordan hung up, his eyes drifting back to the note. He didn't like feeling paranoid, but right now, every shadow in his apartment felt heavier. Every small sound made him turn his head. Minutes passed, slow and quiet. Noise. Not from inside. From the hallway. Soft shuffle. A creak of the floorboards just outside his door. Jordan held his breath. He moved slowly, quietly, toward the peephole again. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he leaned in to look. There was someone there. Not close to the door but just in the hallway, standing near the staircase. His stomach tightened. It was her. The woman from earlier. She wasn't knocking, wasn't moving toward his door. She was just standing there, facing his apartment, watching. Jordan's breath caught in his throat. His fingers hovered over the lock, torn between opening the door and demanding an answer, or staying inside where it was safe. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she turned and walked away. Jordan stayed frozen for a long moment. His mind raced. Why had she been standing there? Was she the one who left the note? If she was, why didn't she say anything? A knock at the door made him jump. His heart nearly stopped before he heard Chris's voice. "Yo, it's me." Jordan quickly unlocked the door and let Chris in. His friend took one look at him and frowned. "Man, you look like you've seen a ghost." Jordan didn't even know where to start. "She was just here," he finally said. "Outside. Just standing there." Chris's expression hardened. "'Kay. That's it. This lady is not just nosy. She's a problem." Jordan nodded slowly, his mind still trying to piece everything together. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not even close. Chris ran a hand over his face, shaking his head. "Nah, man. This isn't just some paranoid lady anymore. She's messing with you." Jordan exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "I don't get it, though. What does she want? First, she tries to stop me from going into my own home. And now she's sneaking around leaving notes." Chris leaned against the counter, staring at the crumpled paper Jordan had left there. "You sure it was her who left this?" Jordan hesitated. "No," he admitted. "But she was just outside my door doing nothing. It was weird." Chris folded his arms. "You should report this. Building security, the landlord, somebody." Jordan nodded, but a part of him wasn't sure what good that would do. What would he even say? Hey, there's a woman who's been watching me, but she hasn't actually done anything illegal yet. Would anyone even take him seriously? Thought hit him. He turned to Chris. What if there are cameras? Chris's eyes widened slightly. In the hallway. There has to be, right? This is a decent building. Maybe the footage shows who left the note. Chris straightened. That's a good idea. Let's check. Jordan grabbed his phone and pulled up the number for the building manager. He had never had to call before, but he hoped they actually kept an eye on things. After a few rings, a groggy voice answered. Yeah. Jordan cleared his throat. Hi, this is Jordan from 4B. Sorry for calling late, but I need to ask. Are there security cameras on my floor? The man sighed like he was already regretting answering. Why? Jordan chose his words carefully. Something weird happened. I think someone left a note under my door, and I need to know who it was. The man was silent for a moment, then said, I can check the feed in the morning. Jordan pressed. Any way you can check now. It's important. Another sigh. Fine. Give me 20 minutes. When Jordan hung up, Chris nodded approvingly. That's a start. They sat in tense silence, waiting. Every little sound in the hallway made Jordan's stomach twist. He kept replaying the woman's expression in his head, the way she had stood there, looking at his door, as if she was waiting for something. 20 minutes stretched into 30. Jordan was just about to call again when his phone finally rang. He picked up quickly. I checked the footage, the manager said. His voice sounded more alert now, almost tense. You were right. Someone left a note under your door. Jordan's grip on the phone tightened. Who was it? Then the manager's voice dropped slightly. It wasn't the woman. Jordan's blood ran cold. He exchanged a glance with Chris, who immediately straightened. Wait, what? Jordan asked. Then who? The manager hesitated. Man. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he was wearing a hoodie. Dark clothes. He came up the stairs, didn't go into any apartment, just walked straight to your door, slipped the note under, and left the way he came. Jordan felt a chill creep down his spine. This whole time, he had been convinced the woman was the one harassing him. But this was something else. Chris spoke up. Does he live here? The manager sighed. I don't recognize him. I'll need to check more footage to see where he came from, but he hesitated. Look man, if I were you, I'd be careful. This doesn't feel random. Jordan swallowed hard. Yeah, thanks. When he hung up, Chris stared at him. Okay. That just made this 10 times worse. Jordan sat down heavily on the couch, his mind spinning. If the woman wasn't the one who left the note, then who was this guy? Was it just some random creep, or was this connected to her somehow? Chris paced. All right, let's think. First, this lady acts like you don't belong in your own building. Then she's standing outside your door doing nothing. Now, some random dude is sneaking around leaving notes. He shook his head. That's not a coincidence. Jordan's jaw clenched. You think they know each other? Chris exhaled. I don't know, but I don't like this. At all. Jordan felt his pulse pounding in his ears. This whole situation had gone from annoying to unsettling to something much worse. One thing was clear now. He wasn't just being watched. He was being targeted. Jordan sat in silence, gripping the armrest of his couch, his mind racing through possibilities. If the woman wasn't the one who left the note, then who was this man? And why was he targeting him? Every instinct told him this wasn't random. Someone was trying to intimidate him. But for what reason? Chris exhaled sharply. All right, man, we need to figure this out before something worse happens. Jordan nodded, his fingers tightening around his phone. I'm not just gonna sit here and wait for the next creepy message. He stood up and grabbed his jacket. Let's go find out where this guy came from. Chris frowned. You wanna go outside now? After everything? Jordan's jaw clenched. If I don't, I'll lose my mind. Chris sighed but followed. All right, but if I get murdered because of your curiosity, I'm haunting you. They stepped into the hallway, the quiet pressing in around them. Jordan's eyes flicked toward the spot where the woman had stood earlier. There was nothing there now, but the eerie feeling remained. He and Chris made their way down the stairs, every creak of the old steps making Jordan more alert. When they reached the lobby, the building manager was standing near the front desk, his face grim. He motioned for them to come closer. "I checked more footage," he said in a low voice. "That guy. He wasn't just some random person wandering in." Jordan felt a lump form in his throat. "Who is he?" The manager hesitated, then turned his computer screen toward them. The paused security footage showed a blurry figure in a dark hoodie entering through the back door of the building. The timestamp was from earlier that night. Chris squinted at the screen. "Wait. That door is supposed to be locked, right?" The manager nodded. "It is." He had a key. Jordan's stomach dropped. "Key? So, he lives here?" The manager shook his head. "I don't think so. But someone let him in." He clicked on another clip. This time the footage showed the woman, her, walking toward the back door just a few minutes before the hooded man arrived. She stood there looking around, then propped the door open slightly before disappearing up the stairs. Chris let out a low whistle. "So she is involved." Jordan stared at the screen, his pulse hammering. "Why would she do that?" The manager exhaled. "Have no idea. But I don't like it." Jordan's mind raced. The woman had tried to block him from entering his own home. She had stood outside his apartment watching. And now she had let some unknown man inside. This wasn't just paranoia. This was deliberate. Chris glanced at Jordan. "You wanna confront her?" Jordan clenched his jaw. "Yeah." The manager hesitated. "Be careful. I'll be watching the cameras in case something happens." Jordan and Chris made their way back upstairs, their footsteps echoing in the stairwell. When they reached the fourth floor, Jordan took a deep breath before knocking firmly on the woman's door. "Silence." He knocked again, harder this time. "I know you're in there," he said. His voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Long pause. Then slowly the door creaked open. The woman stood there, her expression unreadable. Jordan didn't waste time. "Why did you let that guy in?" Her eyes flickered with something. Was it surprise? Guilt? "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly. Chris scoffed. "Don't lie. We saw the footage." The woman's jaw tightened. She glanced down the hallway, then stepped back, motioning for them to come inside. Jordan hesitated but stepped in, Chris right behind him. Her apartment was neat, almost eerily so. The air smelled faintly of lavender, but something about the place felt off. She closed the door behind them and crossed her arms. "You don't understand," she said, her voice quieter now. "I was trying to help you." Jordan blinked. "Help me?" "By letting some guy sneak into the building and leave threats at my door." She shook her head. "I wasn't trying to scare you. I was trying to warn you." Chris let out a sharp laugh. "By watching him instead of just telling him." The woman exhaled, running a hand through her hair. "You don't get it. That man, he's dangerous. He's been hanging around the building for weeks, watching people, looking for a way in. I saw him before but no one believed me. So I left the door open on purpose to see what he would do, if he was really after someone." Jordan narrowed his eyes. "And you thought that someone was me?" She hesitated. "I didn't know. But when I saw him go straight to your apartment, I realized I was right to be worried." Jordan's mind spun. He had been so sure she was the one targeting him. But now, could she actually be telling the truth? Chris folded his arms. "So why didn't you just tell him?" She let out a frustrated sigh. "Would you have listened? You thought I was against you from the start." Jordan opened his mouth, then closed it. She had a point. He had written her off as some bitter, entitled neighbor. But what if she had been trying to figure out what was going on this whole time? Before he could say anything, a loud thud sounded from outside the door. They all froze. Then, another thud, heavier this time. Like something or someone was pressing against the door. Jordan's stomach clenched. Chris whispered, "Tell me that's just the wind." The woman's face had gone pale. "It's him." Jordan's heart pounded. The hooded man. He was here. Chris grabbed his phone. "We're calling the cops." Jordan swallowed hard, his pulse racing as another sound echoed through the apartment, this time the distinct rattle of the doorknob. Whoever was outside wasn't just standing there anymore. They were trying to get in. Jordan's breath caught in his throat as the doorknob rattled again, this time more forcefully. The woman took a step back, her face pale, while Chris was already dialing the police, his hands shaking slightly. "Come on, pick up," Chris muttered under his breath. Jordan moved closer to the door, trying to hear what was happening on the other side. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just trying to scare them anymore. He was trying to get inside. A deep voice came through the door, muffled but clear enough to make Jordan's stomach twist. "Open the door." Jordan didn't move. The voice came again, lower this time. "I just want to talk." Chris finally spoke into his phone. "Yeah, we need the cops now. There's someone trying to break in." Before he could finish, the rattling stopped. Silence filled the air. Jordan felt his body tense, listening for any movement outside, but all he heard was the distant hum of the city through the window. He exchanged a glance with the woman, who was gripping her arms, her breathing unsteady. Chris lowered his phone slightly. Did he leave? Jordan wasn't sure. Slowly, he stepped closer to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No sign of the man. No shadow. Nothing. "He's gone," Jordan whispered. Chris let out a long breath, but the woman shook her head. "Oh, he's still here. He's just waiting." Jordan pulled back from the door, feeling a cold shiver run through him. She was right. The way the man had been standing there, the way he had spoken. He wasn't in a rush. He was patient. Chris frowned. "Cops are on their way. I say we stay put until they get here." Jordan nodded, but his mind was still racing. Who was this guy? Why had he come straight for Jordan's apartment? And how did the woman fit into all of this? She must have sensed his thoughts because she let out a shaky sigh and sat down on the edge of a chair. "I should have told you everything from the start," she said quietly. Jordan turned to her, arms crossed. "Then tell me now." She looked up at him, hesitation flickering in her eyes. Then finally she spoke. "I moved into this building a few months ago," she began. "And almost immediately I noticed something was off. I kept seeing the same man hanging around outside. He never came inside, never talked to anyone, but he watched. Always watching." She swallowed. "At first I thought I was imagining it. But then I started noticing little things. Doors left open. Packages disappearing from doorsteps. And then people started talking about feeling like they were being followed." Jordan's chest tightened. "Why didn't you report it?" "I did," she said quickly. "But the police never took it seriously. No crime had been committed, so they told me to stay alert and call if something actually happened." She let out a bitter laugh. "So I started watching him myself, trying to figure out what he wanted. That's when I realized. He wasn't watching the building. He was watching you." Jordan stiffened. "Me?" She nodded. "I don't know why. But every time you came home he was there. And then that night when I saw him near the back door, I knew he was going to try something. So I left it open, hoping I could catch him in the act, make the building take it seriously. I never thought he'd leave a note. I never thought he'd go this far." Jordan's mind spun. He had been so convinced she was against him this whole time, but now everything made sense. Chris ran a hand over his face. "This is insane. Do you think he's some kind of stalker?" The woman hesitated. "Maybe. Or maybe he's after something else." Jordan's stomach twisted. "But I don't even know him." Before anyone could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Jordan's breath caught, but this time a firm voice followed. "Police." Chris practically yanked the door open. Two officers stood outside, their expressions serious. Jordan had never felt more relieved in his life. They quickly explained everything: the note, the man at the door, the security footage. One of the officers nodded as he jotted things down. "We'll check the cameras and sweep the area," he assured them. "But if what you're saying is true, this guy has been watching you for a while." Jordan swallowed. "And if you don't find him?" The officer's face was grim. "Then you need to stay on high alert." They searched the building, checked the cameras, even questioned a few neighbors. But just as Jordan had feared, the man had disappeared. Vanished without a trace. For the next few days, Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that he was still being watched. Every time he left his apartment, he scanned the streets. Every shadow made his skin crawl. But slowly, as the days stretched into weeks with no sign of the hooded man, he started to let his guard down. Chris kept checking in, refusing to let him be alone at night. And strangely, the woman, whose name Jordan finally learned was Rebecca, became an unlikely ally. "I know you thought I was against you," she admitted one evening when they ran into each other in the hallway. "I don't blame you. I probably came off as intense." Jordan gave her a small, tired smile. "Yeah, a little," she sighed. "But I really was just trying to protect you." Jordan nodded. "I know that now." For a while things felt normal again. Until one night, when Jordan was heading home late from work. As he reached the entrance to his building, a cold breeze sent a shiver down his spine. He glanced around out of habit, his eyes scanning the street. That's when he saw it. Across the road, standing in the dim glow of a street lamp, was a figure. A man in a dark hoodie. Jordan's stomach clenched. The man didn't move. Didn't step forward. Didn't call out. He just stood there, watching. Jordan's breath hitched, but he forced himself to keep walking. This time, though, he didn't look away. 'Cause now he knew better. Now he knew the danger wasn't just inside his building. It was out there in the shadows, waiting.